Well, this week on Buffering, we are joined by Vele Galovski, Regional Vice President of Business Transformation and AI Engagements here at Calix. Vele is a customer-centric services and executive thought leader with more than 2 decades of experience helping companies scale, transform, and grow profitable recurring revenue. And over the course of his career, Vele has held senior leadership positions at companies like Bank of America, Xerox, and Eastman Kodak. And it's really been focused on leading these large-scale transformations that improved customer experience. That's why we're so excited to have him on with us today. Really talk about that operational performance and some of the financial outcomes. That's in my wheelhouse. And he's known for bringing clarity to really complex problems and helping organizations turn strategy into execution. So Vele, welcome. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Yes,
Thanks.
welcome.
Good. Yeah, thanks. Good to be here. Go Bills.
What?
Zach.
Go Bills.
Yeah, go Bills. I said we're going to start the podcast off with 2 things. Number 1, it was in fact a catch, and number 2, go Bills. So Gabe, Gabe, welcome to the Bills podcast now.
Yeah, I know. I feel like I'm getting teamed up on with the 2 of you guys, but
that's true.
I don't know that. I mean, the 49ers and Bills haven't had like a real. Not in a long time, but you got to go back a ways. And I feel like Josh Allen grew up a 49ers fan, right? So there's like some connection there between Josh Allen and the Bills.
We'll give it to you. Just don't be a hater. Gabe. I just,
No, I don't. I can't hate the Bills. It's a lovely franchise. I know you guys have had your share of struggles, but hopefully it'll turn around at some point. Maybe the new stadium will make everything better.
It's going to be a very good year. I've been saying that for many years, but I'm pretty confident.
Zach, for your entire life.
I've been saying it forever, but that's okay. That's what makes it
Vele,
great.
one of the things we had in the introduction was you're the author of the Perpetual Innovation Machine, and I'd love to hear you maybe just share a little bit about that book and what led you to write it and how that whole process came together.
Well, yeah, thanks. One of the things about the book was, after doing a number of transformations, there's certain repeat patterns. Things just kept on happening in every single organization that we went to go make a change. And it's always, I think, a good idea to kind of reduce things to paper, kind of tests out some of your theories. And if it survives, going from your head onto a piece of paper, then you really have something. And the idea of perpetual innovation is a concept that, you don't want to just have a lightning strike moment. What you really want to do is you want to build something in where it just keeps on happening. Do you have a system that recognizes changes? Do you have a system that, you can adjust on the way? And ultimately, the best transformation is the one you never have to do, right? And so that was kind of the idea behind it, and it was fun to write. As you can
Sure,
tell,
it's a really cool experience.
It wasn't. I'm still working, so I mean, it wasn't a commercial success. How's that? But it was a personal success.
I feel like writing a book at some point in your life is a massive personal success and something that you should be proud of, regardless of the financial outcome. That's a very cool thing to have done.
Yeah. So thanks for asking.
Well, and as we get into the conversation today, I'll hand it over here to Zach in a sec. But I think one of the reasons, Vele, we really wanted to have you on was your work in business transformation. And I feel like we're in this massive transformation that's happening right now with AI. And certainly that's one of the huge reasons why you've joined us here at Calix, is to help our customers, through this path. But, just really excited to hear you guys, get into the details a bit more here around AI, business transformation, and how these 2 things kind of tie together.
And they do. They're pretty close.
Yes, indeed.
Well, we can jump right into it here. And in the previous conversation, we talked a little bit. I feel like we talk about this often, though, Gabe, between the 2 of us, is just framing AI as the latest in a long line of business transformations here. So I'd love your perspective here on why you think so many leaders see it as something that's fundamentally different than some of these past transformations.
Yeah, I think, what's interesting about AI is that, it is different. It's technology that really hasn't existed before. It's incredibly powerful, and at the same time, you know, the the interesting part is people start making the mistake because it is really powerful that all I have to do is plug it in. And if I plug it in, great things will happen. But it doesn't really work that way. There was a bunch of studies over the last couple of years that kind of talked a little bit about AI. How's it really working? MIT did this pretty famous study, showed over 90% of AI projects fail to deliver a return. And then there was another Wall Street Journal article last year that said 43% never make it out of pilot. And so, as powerful as AI is, you can't, set it and forget it and, just watch all the great things happen. You have to apply it to specific tasks. You got to incorporate it into your management process if you have one. And it's just one of those things that it's not a panacea. It's something that you really got to work on.
Yeah. And at a high level here, how do you define AI business transformation when you're working with customers?
Well, I really like to position it as a powerful tool that can help solve real world business problems. And, every successful business transformation has certain things in common. Like the leadership team spends more than an hour a month on the breakthrough strategies. It's not like something they do at the beginning of the year and then just move on. You have to make sure that every employee understands the strategy and how they contribute to it every single day. The budget can't be just based on last year's run rate. It's got to be aligned to the transformation. And you got to make sure your employee incentives align with it too, because you don't want to reward people for doing something that's, potentially contradictory to what you're trying to make happen. So when I say, or you say AI business transformation, I like to say it's not really a technology initiative. It's a change initiative using a really powerful tool, but it's a change initiative.
Yeah, I'm gonna hand it over to Gabe here to talk a little bit more about transformation. But I love the comment you made there about setting it and forgetting it. We talk about this in marketing quite a bit. Is especially with automation, it feels like you can set up your marketing campaigns and then forget about them. But I always remind people, no, you have to go back, you have to adapt, you have to follow through on this. I think
Right.
with AI, we're seeing that same thing. If we think about the past 4 years. Gabe and I have talked about this quite a bit as well, but you think about when Chat GPT first came mainstream, everyone was
Yeah.
going to it, kind of asking simple queries or random questions, kind of testing it out. And then we also saw some businesses kind of rolled Chat GPT out or these other AI tools out to their enterprises with no real strategy. It was, hey, here's a new AI tool, use it. And again, set it and forget it does not apply well in this scenario.
No. And I mean, if you really think about it, back in the day, a good manufacturing execution system or, something, an MRP that blasted through a bill of materials, everybody was like, wow, this is the greatest thing in the world. Look at what we can do. Fact of the matter is, the day you issue a forecast, it's wrong. And if you don't have a system in place that says, how do I adjust? How do I adapt? How do I build resiliency and flexibility into my MRP, into my system? You're in trouble, right? So the set it and forget it is not necessarily a new thing, but it's still as dangerous today as it was, throughout history, right? You have to be flexible and you have to be aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
And as we're kind of shifting gears here to talk about some specific examples, as you were talking there, Val, I really got to thinking about like what is the difference between AI and some of these previous business transformations or technology transformations. And I think the thing that really comes to mind for me is in order to get real value out of AI, or at least what's been happening over the last few years. And I do think we're maybe at this point where there's going to be a bit of a shift into some of the agentic stuff where there are a lot more automated workflows that are kind of running behind the scenes that may be a little bit more set it. Maybe hopefully don't totally forget it because there's going to be changes there. But there are going to be things that happen in a more automated fashion. Up to this point, AI has been something that you really have to interact with in order
Yeah.
to get real value from. And there is work that needs to go in to actually getting that value out. And I think that's a bit different than some, technology transformations before, like, okay, we're moving everything to the cloud. All right, well, everything just moved to the cloud. Like there wasn't, obviously there was
No.
work to do that, but once it happened, the technology had shifted and this change was already made. So I don't know. I hadn't really thought about that before until just now as you were talking about that, but it just popped into my head as we were going through that conversation.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it like I said, it's a very powerful tool, and
Hmm.
it does things where it's cognitive in nature. It's not just kind of helping you or bringing a couple things. So it can actually think, it can learn. I mean, machine learning. That's what it's all about: is to understand what's happening in the world around you, responding to feedback, building it back into the model, and to continue to improve. That really hasn't been around, and so I think to some extent, if you build that learning, that feedback loop, um, I mean, you can set it a little bit, but I still think when you get into an enterprise application, you know, Aristotle's not writing any more books, or it's not coming through anymore. New things are happening, and you have to be able to kind of point it at that and keep on learning from new knowledge that's coming into your enterprise.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. And I know we're going to talk kind of good examples, bad examples, and I think that'll come out in some of these things. So that's probably a good transition. We mentioned that you work for Bank of America, and we thought there was a really interesting story here. And Zach and I have talked about this comparison between the broadband industry and the banking industry before, highly regulated industries,
Right.
terms that a lot of people don't understand, maybe what is perceived as not a lot of differentiation or a commoditization of the market that's been happening in banking. I'd love to hear the story that a bit more detail about what Bank of America did and what problem were they actually trying to solve at the time that sent them down this path of business transformation.
Okay. Yeah, it's great because I think it is timeless, right? But just as a little bit of background, in the early 2000s, Bank of America, or at the time it was called Nations Bank, was on a mission to become the first coast-to-coast bank in the United States, right? And for any of you that are Star Trek fans out there, they were the Borg. They used to laugh about being the Borg, but they would just go galaxy to galaxy, acquiring and assimilating other banks. And the distinction was there was a regulation that said banks could not exceed 10% of all deposits in the United States, and they couldn't get beyond that through acquisition. So once Bank of America hit that level, then they had to grow the old-fashioned way, right? They had to earn it. And the problem was nobody likes the Borg. I mean, they're a hated villain. And I remember one time I like I used to get all the executive complaints that would come in. If it went to Ken Lewis, I would look at it with him and we would talk about it. And, people would say, I can't get away from you guys. I mean, when you acquired my bank, I went to another bank and now you acquired that bank and I just can't get away from you. I mean, can't you fix this? And so the problem at that time was the bank's customer satisfaction was lower than the IRS. It had a top two box lower than the IRS. So if you're built on growing the old fashioned way by cross selling, upselling, and retaining customers, good luck. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really hard to do it when you deliver that kind of service. So that was the setup. That's what we had to try to solve for and work into a new way of doing things.
Yeah, happy customers buy more, and pissed off or not happy customers tend to buy a whole lot less. So yeah,
Right,
if
right.
that's a particular challenge. So what did they do differently? How did they approach this, and what allowed them to go through this transformation that's still holding up, even a couple of decades later?
Good question. Um, I think here's the applicability to our industry, any industry. The bank was a Rubik's cube, right? A 3D cube of products, which are think checking and credit card and savings accounts and delivery channels, right? Branches, ATMs, online phone, and then you have these customer segments: consumer bank, private banking, global corporate investment bank, and so on. And so when you look at this, each of those individual silos, they all tried to optimize, their little cube. And the result of everybody optimizing their little piece of that Rubik's cube was the customer was lost in the shuffle. So the single biggest move that we made was to align the entire company from the customer back into the into the bank. And what we wanted to do there was eliminate any friction that they had in terms of doing business with us, and try to do it in a trustworthy way, because you can't mess with people's money. I mean, you mess with somebody's Wi-Fi, and my life depends on it, that's one thing. But when you mess with somebody's money that they earned and all of a sudden it disappeared or there's a problem, that's a big issue. So working and aligning by the customer in is critically important. And I know sometimes when I say that, everybody's like, no kidding, Sherlock. That's the big secret. Is that what I dialed in for? And but the fact of the matter is, ask yourself a question, and that question is, when there's a debate between the product team, you know, more features, and the service delivery team, which is I got to drive my costs down, and the customer, the different personas that you have, who breaks the tie? Does the product team always win? Does the finance, the cost reduction always win? So customer first, it's really easy to say, but when you kind of put it into this, practical perspective, it's pretty hard to do. So yeah, it is a big secret, and executing against it is a little bit difficult and hard to do. Not for everybody.
One of the other things that really comes out of that story to me is that singular focus from an organization. I'm reading this book right now called Made to Stick, and one of the examples that's given in that book, and Zach has no recollection of this product whatsoever, but there was a thing called a Palm Pilot, Zach. This predated the smartphone. Do you remember this at all? Like, was
Oh,
your dad carrying
no.
around a Palm Pilot at one point in his
I
life?
I don't know anything about the Palm Pilot, but I think I've mentioned this in a
Val
past
remembers the Palm
episode.
Pilot.
I,
Who
I mentioned
didn't?
this in a past episode, but if you watch because this is what I do in my free time, if you watch the 2007 video of Steve Jobs announcing the iPhone, people were
Mhm.
like cheering and like celebrating when he scrolled with his finger. So, see
Yes.
if I can kind of make some,
Yes, because the Palm
connections
Pilot
here.
had this little weird stylus that you had to
Stylus,
use.
yeah.
And the
hmm
I won't belabor the whole story, but the story about the Palm Pilot is when they were developing it, their their CEO was so singularly focused on the size of the product. It couldn't be too big. And so your point there about the debate between the product team and the service delivery team or another part of the organization, even if the product team came and said, "Hey, we could put this new feature onto the product," he was like, is it going to increase the size? Well, yes, it'll increase this. Nope. It's just a hard no.
Right.
And that they had that singular focus that in order for this product to be successful, it has to be physically a certain size. And we need to make sure that every single decision that we make drives to that. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. Again, that singular level of focus in an organization, driving back to, in this case, something that I know Zach is very passionate about, the customer experience and meeting the customer where they are. And it seems like that
Uh-huh.
was really that focus at Bank of America at the time.
For sure. Yeah, you truly have to put the customer first. And we actually called it, um, building golden threads, following the persona right from acquisition through expansion and, renewals, and, not in the bank's case, but actually through the full life cycle of the customer. And if you don't do that, I think you've got some trouble. Even
Mm-hmm.
and it's not just Bank of America. Michael Dell is famous for saying at Dell, staple yourself to the order, and follow it through. What are you putting the customer through? And sometimes it's pretty ugly what you're putting the customer
Yes, they
through.
can be.
And so if you focus on that and work that through your process and try to get them from beginning to end as fast as possible with as few mistakes as possible, you're going to win. That's a big deal.
Mm-hmm. I'd be curious to hear your perspective on, we talked about regulated industries. Why do you think regulated industries like banking make such strong transformation examples, and like in this case, at Bank of America?
I, it sounds crazy and simple, right? But they have rules to follow. It's
Mhm.
in the title. It's in the industry. It's a regulated industry, and I don't know it to be true, but I'm pretty sure that if there wasn't a deposit cap, I'm willing to bet that Bank of America would have continued to be the Borg.
Mhm.
They were really good at it. They were good at acquiring, assimilating, and delivering terrible service. And we would have just kept on doing the same old, right? But being in that regulated industry, it kind of forced the change, and I think they became better as a result of that forced change.
I love talking about banking. Prior to Calix, I spent just over a year in community banking, so at a much smaller scale. And a part of that was overseeing our digital banking products. And one of the things that always gives me a little bit of like PTSD is with community banking. Of course, you have a much different audience or much different customer base. But being focused on digital banking, one of the products we had was Bank by Phone. And every time I think of my role at this bank, all I can think of was how bad I wanted to shut down Bank by Phone, where you could call in, go through like the robotic numbers. It would take you longer to do that than it would to use the actual app. But people would
Right.
call in and say, "Hey, Bank by Phone's down," and like you would know when it's not working. So I had to back off that a little bit. But that's my banking trauma for the day. Always happy to talk about digital banking though.
Hey,
Um,
Zach, here's an interesting thing, right?
yeah.
Bank of America was the first widespread online banking institution, and that was part of this transformation. Uh,
Mhm.
first one to get to 2 million online users way back in the day. Um, and now I think there's a lot of people that say that is so good. I will never go into a branch, but there's other reasons for going into a branch, but it's not to make a deposit. It's not to check your balance. It's not, I mean, the digital banking has really kind of transformed the industry.
Yeah. Well, Gabe and I joke all the time. I think the one time I've been into a bank over the past few years was when I bought a car and I don't have checks. I don't have a checkbook. So I had to go to a bank and have them print out a check. And it was funny having worked at a bank and spent time at a bank. Like you
Yeah,
learn how to do this and oh man, it would have been like elementary school, middle school kind of thing. But you
yeah,
quickly forget when you have apps like Venmo and whatnot. So that's my Gen Z comment of the day. Always happy to talk about banking. There's so much there. The data, the reporting that I had built, similar to the Bank of America example there of moving people into our digital platforms. One of my goals was to move people not only to digital but to mobile. So we kind of were tracking how people would stop using like the desktop websites and see
yeah,
that increase across the app and through those platforms. But conversation for another day. That's
yeah.
enough banking. Um,
Well, I'm a baby boomer, and here's the clue, right? I still wear a watch, and I still use cash.
you when you say watch, we're talking like an Apple Watch or like a
Well, yeah,
Galaxy Watch,
I'm
right?
kind of I'm getting there, but it's I still have a watch and I still use cash, and
Well,
I'm sorry, but I'm
I've said this on the podcast before too, but there's nothing worse than getting in line at a checkout or like a drive-through and someone's counting cash. So as long as
oh
as long as you're not ahead of me in a line and then I'm trying to use
no,
Apple Pay,
I get it.
no.
I'm
But
respectful.
one of the things we like to do on the podcast is we always say without naming names, and then we end up naming a name at some point. But without naming names, what are some of the common ways you've seen AI or digital transformation go wrong? We talked about a great example there, but where can things go south?
Well, in general, where things go south are when companies get enamored with the shiny new penny, or the belief that, come on, baby, buy me a new pair of shoes. The new tech thing is going to win it for me. It's gonna make all the difference. And I kind of thought about it, and then let's name names. There's a pretty famous example. I'm not talking about anything from a personal perspective, but Klarna, also, fintech, is a pretty famous example. Uh, about 2023, 24. they pursued a no human support strategy. They thought that OpenAI could replace all 700 service agents with AI chatbots. And so that's what they did. And, it was a big deal. It's like, this is the way to go. And yeah, they did save money. But guess what? They also experienced an incredibly sharp drop in CSAT. The service quality was terrible. And then they spent all of 2025 trying to hire back all of those employees because that AI application fell way short of handling complex, nuance, anything that required empathy. It just didn't work, right? So that was a transformation gone wrong because they really didn't think it through. They saw this and said, "Oh, this is fantastic. How hard could that be?" Well, as it turns out, if your processes are bad, it's it can be pretty hard.
It reminds me of an example I shared with Gabe. Well, sort of been probably 2 years ago, Gabe. So the recall on this, but a car dealership. I can't remember the brand, if it was Ford or Chevy, but one of these big dealers. They put the AI chatbot on their website. This is something that a lot of people were doing at the time, and since has
Mhm.
improved significantly. But people were going to this website and asking, "What kind of car should I buy? What's the best car?" And it was recommending brands like Tesla, something totally not made by this company. But I always
I
think
do
of that
remember that. That
implementation
was
when I think
great.
of where AI didn't quite fill in the gap
Mhm.
correctly.
Right.
Well, I think one of the other things to go to the Klarna example, or even what we've seen with some other companies, is so in a situation like that with Klarna, where it just completely falls down, you still need to support the customer. And so the customer
Uh-huh.
ends up having to go through a channel, a different channel, or potentially multiple channels. And that's where you really start to see CSAT impacted and customers getting really frustrated when they're having to go through all of these different channels. Why do you think that still happens, Val, where there's this breakdown of of the technology that forces people to contact companies in multiple ways?
It's I think it's very foundational. The reason this keeps on happening, right, is because it's the way every single company is organized. If you really think about it, right? You've got a marketing group, you've got a sales group, you got services, you've got install, you've got success. Everybody has these functional silos, and every org gets tasked with improving the efficiency within that silo. And there's very little consideration for, like I described earlier, that golden thread, something that cuts across. And in when you're in these silos and you're organized that way, you're paid that way, you're incented that way. Um, People don't really care what happens before them, and they don't really care about what happens after them. Now, I'm saying that metaphorically, right? Because I'm aligned to this. So, if a customer has a question, what does everybody do? Over 90% go to your tier 0 support, which is Google. you know, Everybody goes to Google first. And then when Google says if you've managed to index it right and if you've managed to have the right hook, they may show up on your company website. And then when they get to the company website, you do a couple things and then, you move them over to the self-service website because you've got a whole web marketing group and a self-service group. And then, they try to answer the question, but you can opt out and maybe, and now you find yourself talking to a support rep on the phone. Well, they're tier 1 support. Maybe they can't answer the problem. Then they take you to tier 2 support. So guess what happens? Every single time you have to put in, what's my entitlement?
Mm.
What's my problem? What am I trying to do here? And, after 5, 6 times, that's an issue.
Yeah. And that's that danger of optimizing. There's all this work that goes into optimizing an individual function without
Right.
that view across the entire customer journey. And I agree with you. I think, we certainly see that in some organizations where, yeah, people have these little fiefdoms or, things that they have some level of control over, but there isn't the leadership component of the strong leadership component of driving out across the entire organization.
Talked about this in the past, and we mentioned it early on in the podcast too. But AI initiatives being stuck in pilot. Why do you think that happens so often?
Uh, you know, It's a nuanced thing, right? Uh, Experimentation is really important, right? People will work on things that are interesting to them, and you kind of play, and maybe you do a little bit of pilot, but that remains something that's really important to have in place. Um, but if you want to scale, you have to be focused on something that's meaningful, not only meaningful to you and your organization, but to the company at large, right? So if you don't if you don't do that, you don't get the resources, you don't get the support, you don't get the funding to take that from an experiment. It could be a meaningful experiment, but you don't get to take that enterprise wide. So like when people do things that is fun for them, it's kind of like a cool tool or whatever. um they start to make some progress, but now when we want to expand it, it's like there's no money there. Why am I doing that? It's not fixing my problem. It may be fun for you, it may be interesting for you, and I'm glad you learned, but it doesn't go beyond that. And I think that's some of the problems. It starts with how did you kick this thing off? If it's just experimentation, or is it really trying to drive some improvement?
Yeah, and what role do you think management processes, cadence, planning, feedback loops? What role do you think that plays in whether or not an AI transformation succeeds?
I I feel like LeBron James in that commercial with Kevin Hart. Everything. It's got everything to do. No, I'm sorry, but anyways, there are leadership meetings or communication meetings. Remember, I said this is a change. This is a change initiative, and so the importance of a leadership meeting, the annual meetings, is you got to make sure that your leadership team is aligned. I think we've all been at companies, or we've all been in situations where we're talking to two leaders, and it's like, are you guys on the same page? Do you guys know each other? What's going on? And these leadership meetings are important to make sure that everybody is still on the same agenda, that we've aired things out, and that we're focused. Then there's the communication side of it. The communication piece is everybody in your company know what's happening here, why we're doing this, and what role I play in achieving that bigger goal. So those are two components. And then what you have to add in is, it's hard to just focus on the year. I like the idea of having a 90-day cadence, and weekly meetings from top to bottom in the company, and the whole focus is I want to eliminate obstacles to me achieving my 90-day goals. And when you set that up and you start looking for obstacles, you keep on aligning, that's where you get the feedback of what's working, what's not working, and what do we have to do to improve. And with AI, I mean, you have to stay on top of it. Are you getting the same results? Little things can make a big difference in these initiatives. And so that change piece of that management process is critically important.
Yeah. And at what time do you think a company should take a timeout, go Bills, and pause their AI efforts instead of pushing forward?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks. For those that don't understand, Go Bills has multiple meanings. It means hello, it means goodbye, it means keep up the good work, it means I'm with you, you're my brother, everything. So Go Bills, it means lots of things, but it means everything to us, right? So, anyways, I had a mentor who always used to say, you know, if you're digging into a hole, the first thing you do is stop digging. And so if you have an AI pilot that's not aligned to a company objective and you're spending money, stop digging. That's the right time, to stop that effort. Now that doesn't mean that you should stop experimenting on things, where you get to learn. But I think once you start spending money on pilots, make sure it's tied to a business outcome.
And as we kind of wrap up here on the AI discussion, a couple more questions for you. You've talked about AI agents as being something that can cross these cross functional silos. Why is that so important to do?
If you staple yourself to the order, or if you follow the end-to-end journey of a customer, the handoffs the handoffs are between the functional silos. That's where all the problems occur. it's where you have delays, you have misinterpretation, you have communication issues, you don't have all the data you need to, to carry on. And today, that burden is carried by the customer. They're the ones who have to wait. They're the ones who have to repeat their information and their objectives and their problem many, many times. And, ultimately they don't get the complete answer they were looking for, right? So um, the role of an agent, because it is powerful, it is powerful, incredible reasoning power. It can help you in all these different ways. It can help you assess performance gaps. It can help you with compliance, between the functional silos, and it can even recommend improvements. But the one thing that it can't do is it cannot make up for a bad process.
It's
And go
such a
ahead,
great
Gabe.
point there. Oh, I was just going to say I think that's really where we see a lot of these challenges, Val, is that, as you said, it's not some panacea where you can just throw AI at a bad process and it's going to magically fix everything, or bad data for that matter.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Sorry, Zach, I cut you off. I don't know if there was something else you
No,
wanted to add there.
that was great. Just and look, the last couple of things here, and then I'll hand it over to you, Gabe. But Val, for you, where do you see leaders misunderstanding the role that AI can realistically play in solving some of these cross functional problems? As Gabe mentioned, you can't just throw AI at a problem and hope it's fixed. But how can we solve some of these cross functional problems?
I think um, activity needs purpose, right? So you don't just throw it at for the sake of throwing it at an issue, but I mean, understand what is it that I hope to accomplish, and um, how do I actually make that improvement that we all need. And there are three different I'll call phases of AI. There is the experimentation part. I mean, people have to get familiar, they have to get comfortable with it, and they have to know kind of its limitations, right? Because if you don't know the role of good data, like if I point the AI at something, it'll give me one answer. If I point at another data set, it'll give me a completely different answer, right? So if you don't learn some of those things through experimentation, um, when you go to the second level of, starting to apply it to business problems and starting to do things that are a little bit repeatable, you're gonna kind of fall short. And then ultimately, when you have those first two done, the third component is going to be um, I'm really embedding this into my process. I know how it works. I'm going to focus on the workflows. I'm going to apply it specifically. And what we're really going to do is we're going to make sure that the customer has that seamless experience.
And before I
Yeah.
turn it over to Gabe, I've got a question that's kind of been sitting in the back of my head here. And I've had a strong influence on Gabe over the past few years, for better or for worse.
Not
Um,
on football teams, though, right? I
not
mean,
on
he's
football teams.
still
I don't
But
think
on
I've
lots
got
of
him there
well.
other
That's
yet.
things.
all right.
But
Keep on
and
working. Keep on working.
one of those things I'm curious, Val, is and Gabe, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this too. Although over the past week, I think I know the answer. But Val, where do you, either from a professional or personal standpoint, what AI tools or where have you found the most value in interjecting an AI solution into your life, your professional life?
Wow, man, it's crazy. I use a lot of them for lots of different things. It's like um, AI means so many things to so many people and even different applications. Um, if I want to find something that's very current, I'll use Perplexity, right? Because Perplexity, and once again, this is not an endorsement of any, but I'll use that because I think it's a really good tool for you know scrubbing websites every single day and kind of getting you that up to date information. There are other things where I'll create my own language model. Um, so like I have a lot of the things that I've written in the past and I'll create that language model. And so I'll query my own language model because it gives me feedback. It gives me feedback in my voice and it's using some of the stuff that I've written in the past and it'll bounce off of that. So I can use that there. But then when I want to fine tune it, I may use, ChatGPT or Anthropic is, so each application has a very different good thing about it. And, but the point is, I think the gist of your question is I use it for a lot of things, and it just helps me ultimately become more productive. With what I'm doing, it's like, yeah, I could figure that out, but man, it sure did go a lot faster that way, and I don't feel bad about it because it's pointed at my stuff, or it's not the end product, but it does get me that 70-80% solution that really speeds things up dramatically.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd say my use is very similar, Val. It's definitely using different tools for different purposes. Personally, I would say ChatGPT and Gemini have been my most common use cases, especially for things like shopping use cases and research use cases. Those have been really helpful. I've
Right.
told Zach this, but we're in the middle of a bathroom remodel at my house because we had some issues. And so, even just looking for things like shower doors and lights for the bathroom and those sorts of things, hugely helpful for those types of use cases in both ChatGPT and Gemini. From a work perspective, just because we're so deeply embedded with Microsoft, I end up using Copilot a lot and have built
Mhm.
custom agents like you were talking about for, pointing at specific resources and giving answers. I think that's really powerful. But I finally bit the bullet and started paying for Claude, and holy good God, is that thing incredible. I
Right.
I spent about an hour last night building something that I was trying to build in Copilot for the last like week and have been struggling. And I was I was thinking about this morning, Zach. It's almost like the first time we started using ChatGPT, and everybody was just so floored at how you could just put a prompt in and stuff would come out the other side. I felt that way with Claude last night, where I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is unbelievable."
Mhm.
I had a really clear view of what it was that I wanted, but again, I was struggling with actually getting it created, and what it created was incredible, and I think is going to be extremely beneficial for some projects that I'm working on. And I was just really really impressed. So it's been exciting seeing all of the advancements, and every time you think you're getting used to what AI can do, all of this stuff seems to change and makes me even more enthusiastic about how beneficial it's going to be for all of us to save us time, and frankly just to help us create things that I wouldn't have been able to create before, because I don't have the capability to code or do some of these other things that would have been required for me to do this in the past. Anyway,
Yeah.
I
Gabe,
could talk about this stuff forever,
as long
but
as you're not the one who's out on Twitter talking about your new project on localhost 8080, I think we'll be
no,
fine.
no,
But
no. I'm
I
not gonna talk about vibe coding something to kill a SaaS platform like everybody seems
that's
to be doing right now. So
that's
yeah,
that's
no,
super
that's
funny.
not in
All
my
the
wheelhouse.
Salesforce vibe coding memes, but and I
Yeah,
want to
Hey,
do a
just
future episode on
I'm
this
sorry, Zach.
too. Yeah,
Just want to add to that, if I could. Right? I mean, the experimentation never stops. Right? I mean, it's not like you graduate
yes,
from experimentation and move on. As these new tools come out, it's really helpful to keep on looking and learning
hmm
and finding new things, and you know, then you know what works, and you can. It's like a force multiplier. You just keep on getting better and better at it, but you can
hundred
never
percent,
stop being curious, never stop experimenting, looking for stuff, all
I think
within your
that's
corporate
ultimately
guidelines.
how Gabe and I got to where we're at today. We when ChatGPT first came out, one of the first things I built. This was back when Twitter was Twitter and had an API, but I built a Twitter account that would respond to tweets. So kind of like what Grok does today. I did it first, and that API was closed off, and you had to pay for it. So that was long lived. But a future episode here, Gabe. I think we've moved across different tools. We've looked at different business outcomes. I think one of the biggest ones we geeked out on about a year ago was more so like the deep research, the ability
hmm
to go
yeah,
out and collect this real time live data from the internet and then pull it in. That's something that users could take hours, days doing. A lot of the research things we do, Gabe, from a business outcome perspective, from a go to market perspective as well, looking at our competitors and whatnot as well. To
hmm
you mentioned Claude. I'm a fan of Claude, not an endorsement, but the ability to go out and build things. I've been playing with Xcode and iOS apps since high school, but the ability to accelerate that, learn new things, and to quickly adopt, a lot of the Apple design processes. And even today, Gabe, I mentioned the ability to take, something directly from Figma and put it into an app, or take something from, my app and put it into Figma. It's totally changing, what these standard processes, if I can call them that, have historically been. And again, business outcomes is kind of the phase two, and the podcast episode I want to save for the future as well. But Gabe, let's wrap up the episode here and just talk about some key
Yeah.
takeaways.
Yeah, sounds good. I'll just ask you one question here, Val, and I think it's hopefully a good one to end on. But for leaders who are listening to this, folks who are listening to this, what should leaders focus on first if they want AI to really deliver value into their business? What's the advice that you would give them?
I, you know, I think the simplest exercise that any leader can do is, look at the tasks of your organization or, different departments, and then put those tasks, put those activities into one of three buckets, right? Number one is things that can be done by AI today, self-service, capabilities, things like a password resetter, something that's very common knowledge that, the customer would appreciate a faster response, and your employees will appreciate not having to answer how to do that 20 times a day. I mean, it's just not fun for anybody, right? So that's one bucket. Then there's a second bucket where you say, kind of like what we've been talking about, the last couple minutes here, is what are the things that AI can augment? Like help me do things better, faster, whatever comes across my desk. What is it that AI can kind of help me improve my personal productivity, my desktop, make that work better. And then the third thing is there are things that only people can do. So have a third bucket of the complex, reasoning, delivering empathy, being able to, kind of read what's happening and get to the right solution. And then, once you get those three buckets, I'd look at buckets 1 and 2 and say, that's where I'm going to apply AI. And there's a lot of things that are very proven technologies. They've been out there for a few years. The pioneers have been shot. Things have been fixed. It's in good shape. Apply those in bucket 1. Let's make that work. Get your sea legs, start to keep on improving. And then, you'll get that fuzzy edge that's going to help you get into bucket 2. And then I think that's where you can start down that road.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here today. I think this was a fantastic conversation, and Val, I think you've definitely earned a spot to continue this discussion here in a future episode as well. I think we have a lot more to discuss.
Sure. Yeah.
All right.
And the
Well, thank you,
Bills.
everyone.
Go Bills.
Thank you.
Go
I was
Bills.
going
Yeah.
to say, are we really wrapping it up without a Go Bills? I can't
No,
believe how
no.
you're going to let that go.
Someone
No,
else.
it's-
I already snuck mine in today.
Yeah, that's hello. It's goodbye. It's thank you for having me. Go Bills.
Yes. Well, thank you again for joining us, and thank you everyone for tuning in to Buffering. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow us on your favorite podcast app and to share it with your friends and colleagues. And for more insights and updates, be sure to connect with us on LinkedIn.